taped the Alexander lecture. It didn't tape, right? Well, I don't know why. I just learned today. I've been directing everyone to our website that couldn't make it, but I will tape it on my own, and John will post it because I can't do it on our website. But first, I have to tape it, and I didn't have time today, so we're going to figure that out. And I have wonderful news for you. My children are coming from San Diego on Saturday.
Yes.
Yay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
Oh, wonderful.
So
How long are they
excited.
going to be here?
1 week.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Before you get started, Donna, can I interrupt for just a
But
second?
of course.
Somebody had a notebook that they left.
It
us.
was mine,
Oh,
and I
good.
picked it up.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that it got where it needed to go. If there
Thank
wasn't
you.
any name in it, I thought,
No.
oh, okay, good. All right, great.
All right. So, John, ready when you are?
It's cool.
Oh, then come, Holy Spirit, come with us as we walk through this history into the pages of the Word, and then back out into our community to share it with everyone. So, welcome back. Welcome if you're new. And as always, you're not new, but it's good to see you here. She was a pool shark, but I'm not kidding, and I don't mean pool. I mean the pool. But she got the other pool sharks to change, so we're glad you're here.
I'm not a pool shark. I'm a beginner.
Yeah,
But you will be.
you're a sharkling, a little sharkling. Now we flew last week through centuries. Yes,
Can we introduce everyone that's here? I
I
don't
think
know
that's
everyone.
a great idea.
but of course, yeah, I wish we could turn that off. I am Donna Batchelor, and I'm the pastor of this institution. And
I'm Sherry Kurtechner, and I'm a member of this church.
I'm Elaine Ludwig, and I'm a member of this church.
Arlene Glover, a visitor. Good.
John Glover, visitor.
potential.
Scott Pollock, a member.
Seasonal. Marsha Wolfgram, and thankful for this church.
Oh, thank you.
Pam Klein, half a year member on and off.
Dawn Mason.
Seasonal. Yeah.
Attendee all the time.
Yes.
Kathy Wilson, I'm a snowbird.
Yeah, and we're happy
Glad
that
to have you all.
that you flew here. So last week I started, and I could tell just by looking at you. It was an unusual lecture. People are saying this. And remember Jeff, who was here? Yeah, this was his very first time, and he's looking at me like I'm a crazy person. You know, what does this have to do with like Bible study? And you know, that is a question that was probably flying around your heads, but you're just far too nice to ask me about it. The question. So I'm going to propose the question. Pastor Donna, what the hell does this have to do with Bible study, right? How does it help me get right with God? Or how does it help me get help from God? How do these lectures that you're writing and presenting, how do they help me understand what God wants me to understand? Exactly, what are we trying to learn here? Why are we looking at Alexander and Caesar? And how can this examination make me a better Jew or a Christian or a better Muslim even, or even a better atheist? What's the point of this, Pastor? But you guys don't just stop there. I can see it in your head, right? You're going, yeah, very interesting. But is it really edifying? And I know that this is a group that loves to be edified. And I know you're saying, let's face it, Latin. It's a language that's been dead for a long time, and only people in Greece speak Greek anymore. So why are we looking at this? Well, we're going to look at it closely because it's Greek and it's Roman. And we're going to look at what we still do because of Greece and Rome. For example, we still flush our toilets. We still vote every chance we get. We still go to the theater, and we still go to the fights. And we do so much more because of the Greeks and Romans. And that goes for the way we worship. too. How much of your religion comes from Greece and from Rome? So that's what we're going to do here together. We're going to look at that legacy. But just so you know, a lot of people claim that it's kind of an out of date way to approach the examination for us today. And some people are really passionate about this. So now, in education, and even hi, honey, come on in. We saved you this seat right here. No, don't worry.
And I forgot to call Bonnie, so I'm calling her right now.
Oh, great. Oh, great. There is a move, mostly from academia, to stop the examination of Western culture in our study of history. Western culture, and instead of focusing on the West, we're supposed to refocus in a globalized way. Um, Global focus. So some people are saying we should actually be asking, what do I do today because of what happened in sub-Sahara Africa 2,000 years ago, or in Papua New Guinea?
We've already started. I just. But
Hi, Bonnie. Welcome to everybody.
Morning.
Be- Hi. Because let's face it, right? We're children of the world. The whole world made me who I am today, not just the Greeks and Romans. Now, have you ever heard that being said at your cocktail parties? This is a very tricky discussion, but not for us today. We are going to discuss this, but today we have other things. Now, do you remember Faulkner, William Faulkner? He's a white guy, great writer. As I Lay Dying, The Sound and the Fury, and I loved his book Absalom. Absalom, great novelist. But do you remember what he said about history? Remember, this is what he said: the past is never dead. In fact, it's not even past. Now, think about that as we go through this study. We're still doing the Greco Roman past, and we're still reading the stories that the Greeks and the Romans wrote. And we're still going to the theaters where they wrote their performances. And we're still watching the Olympics, right? But now all the Olympic athletes are wearing clothes, and we're going to talk about that. But I don't know if you think that's a good thing or a bad thing. Nude athletes, right? I guess it depends on what the athlete really looks like, right? But we'll talk about that later. But we're still reading. Yeah, and she's seen them all, right, Bob? We're still reading our holy books, the Torah and the Bible and the Gospels and the Quran. And we're not reading those books to learn about ancient history. We're reading them to give meaning to the history that we inherited from these holy books. Why do we do the things we do as Jews or Christians or Muslims? And that's why we're looking at great men like Alexander and Julius Caesar. And notice I said great men, not necessarily good men, but men who made a difference. For the good men and women that many of us esteem and we worship, like Jesus. Jesus was a Jew who lived in the Roman Empire that was run with plenty of Hellenic influence. So, do you think that we can safely assume that the Greco Roman empires had a great influence on Alex or on me, on the way I love my God and the way I live my love for my God? So, that's why we're looking at this the way we are, through the lens of Greco Roman culture. And if you hate this, take heart, because we're not going to be here forever. Next week, we're going to move on to two new topics. But for now, let's go back to Greece and its so-called empire so we can get a quick look at the education system. And we know we still use a lot of that system that was started there. We still use it here today. Not all of it, of course, but today we're going to look quickly at what we kept and what we let fall into history. But I really enjoyed last week getting to know Alexander, and it will be available on our website. I'm going to tape it again. Yeah, and what an influence Alex had on the Romans. And that's what we're going to look at today because we're going to go to Rome today, like the Greeks did. But first, let's look at what the Greeks brought with them when they went to Rome. And let's start with the system of education that the Greeks brought to Rome. Schools, like the academies, which became the universities of our world. And kids had to prepare for the university just like today. Greek boys started school at about age 6, just like today. Boys did, but not girls. The girls stayed home and studied homemaking. Now, ladies, did anybody here take home ec?
Yep.
Yes.
Made my little purple apron,
Only
right?
class I ever got
Um,
a C in.
But
I got the award for home ec.
home
Oh,
ec.
wow.
But I bet you those two didn't make aprons. I bet they studied world economics. You stayed in, but boys in school also studied theater and poetry and music and art. And the boys learned how to play. So the Greeks made sure that physical education was a major component in their educational system, mostly because the Greeks wanted their boys to be physically fit so that they could become good soldiers. But Greek boys should also learn, according to the Greeks, how to appreciate beauty. So here again, we see that sort of melding of the spirit of the physical and the metaphysical combination in Hellenism. And the most Hellenistic kind of school was the gymnasium. And we know that word, right? Gymnasium. It's a place for exercise. So it could be private, membership only, or it could be public. Or in the case of the Romans and the Greeks, it was both public and private. And gymnasium is a Greek word. But does anybody know what it means? It means naked.
Oh,
I'm not kidding. That's the bare naked truth. Gymnasium means the naked place. And that makes sense because people in those days, meaning the men, people got naked to go there. And they actually got naked once they got there so that they could play games naked. And the men who went there played all kinds of games. And it can be a bit uncomfortable to talk about this, but we are going to strip away the lies, look at the naked truth of this particular form of education. Men and young boys went there to the gym, the gymnasium, to get in shape. So they played games and they exercised in the nude. So they wrestled and they threw javelins and shot puts and they ran and jumped and they shot arrows and they did sit-ups and pull-ups and they lifted weights and they ran around the track laps and they did it all in the all together, right? Completely nude. And I suppose doing all that in the nude kind of makes sense, right? You're working out, you're getting sweaty. Why should you make your clothes sweaty? Work out, take a shower, and then get dressed. But they played other games at the gymnasium too, like checkers and domino type games. And just so you know, they played those games in the nude too. Can you imagine playing checkers? But why? Why did the men do this in the nude? Well, some say that the gymnasium was there to make sure that a certain kind of mentoring tutorial system was always available, which is kind of beating around the bush. It's a euphemism. And we use euphemisms like this because the stark reality of the gymnasium it just sounds harsh to us. I think it sounds disturbing because some scholars note that the gymnasium was habitually stalked by older men. Stalked. That sounds very sinister in my interpretation. But in real life, back in the day, older men went to the gymnasium hoping to attract a young man, a kid, who would become, hi, sweetie. Yeah, we'll get you a chair. Oh, you got it? Oh, good. Um, yes, we've gotten naked already, so get ready. Not us, just the men. We weren't allowed in the gymnasium. So these older men were hoping to attract a kid, young man, who would become for a while the older man's boy of his dreams. And these boys were encouraged by the older man to take part in procreative activities. But of course, they couldn't procreate, right? Even though the women in the Greek and in Roman society had very little or no power, um, they still had the power of procreation, and they still do. Women procreate. Man can't do it alone. And when they do, ladies, we're doomed. Get ready. You're going to have to go find that island in the Greece or something. But at the gymnasium, men wanted to engage in activities while they wouldn't result in child bearing, they would result in pleasure, like man and women procreative activities usually do. They usually end in pleasure. And same thing with the gymnasium activities. They are designed to end in pleasure, especially for the older man. Now we know that there's a name for that. Um, but in Greek, it's not child abuse, it's not rape. This is Greece, so it's a very fancy schmancy, God bless you, fancy schmancy name. It's called pederasty. Now, have you ever heard of that? The Greeks practiced it, but the Romans perfected it. And so sadly, it's still happening today. Older men having sex with young boys. Then it was mostly sex for favors. But now, today, thank you, Jesus, this is a crime. It's still practiced, but it's against the law. But back then, it was totally socially acceptable. And in fact, it was considered a fair trade off. The older man imparts wisdom to the young naked kid in exchange for sex. And that was considered a win win for the society. And sadly, it still is in some societies today. Just think about human sex trafficking. I can't even think about that. In fact, let's get out of the gym. Let's put our clothes back on. Oh, stay dressed, Bonnie. You're good. And let's look at other forms of entertainment that were available to the Greeks and the Romans. For example, you could spend the day at the races, at the hippodrome. Hippodrome sounds like you'd go there to see hippos, right? But it's Greek, horses, horse racing. But the Romans, do you know what the Romans called a hippodrome? They called it the circus. Yeah, the circus. Now, on the dark side, in Rome, a bit later, you could go to the Colosseum and watch gladiators kill each other. And as time went on, the Romans added extra special entertainment for your enjoyment. You could watch lions kill Christians at the Colosseum. So that's where you went to enjoy brutal, bloody killings after you left the circus, right? But you couldn't do that in the Greco Empire because when it came to men killing each other, the Greeks, it seems, were far more practical. Usually we think of the Romans as being more practical, but here it was the Greeks who were actually sensible. They believed that it was expensive to train men in fighting skills. The men practiced and they learned all these great ways to fight, only to have one man kill the other man at the end of the fight. Well, for the Greeks, that seemed like such a waste of a well trained man. But the Greeks knew that everybody loved a good fight. So the Greeks got really good at staging fake fights. And they called it theater. What did they call it?
Wrestling.
Oh, wrestling. Yeah, they actually, you're right. In the nude. I mean, it was such a hit. You see, good actors could die night after night, and they still do, right? But it's still
Yeah.
cheaper than one man killing the other one. So, how much can we thank Alexander for that? Well, we're still looking at that. How much did Alex and all the Hellenistic culture impact Rome? Or maybe we should rephrase it saying, how much did Rome pull out of the culture from Alex and the Greeks? But I don't think many people were putting anything over on Rome. Even in the early days of the Roman Empire, it was strong. And as time went on, it got even stronger. Um, and it probably got stronger with help, at least some help from the Greeks. So this week, we're going to Rome and we're going to stay there for a little while so we can get to know Romans a little better. Now, we talked about this before. How many of you have visited Rome before? Okay, so you're my experts, but be prepared. Hi, come on in, darling. Did you get caught in the rain?
Oh,
Oh, yes, everybody seems to be having. Yeah, drag up a chair from right there. Perfect. Very good. We're just ready to hit Rome. And even if you've been there, be aware you ain't seen Rome the way the Romans saw it in the first century. Now, next week, we're going to look at the two religions that impacted the two civilizations that we're looking at, the Greeks, the Hellenists, and the Romans. So next week, get ready to look at Judaism and Christianity. But now we're going to hit the road, literally. Get on the road to Rome, very old roads. But those ancient Roman roads are still being used by today's travelers. I find that so interesting. Actually, all kinds of Roman structures are still being used today in the 21st century. It's amazing. Romans were phenomenal builders, and they were especially good road builders. And you know that old saying, all roads lead to Rome. Well, that was true back then. That's where all the roads led. Now, today, we think of that statement as a way to say there are many good ways to get to the same place, the good place, where we all want to be, a place of peace, where all people are respected, and all people live in safety and dignity. And I hope that's true. I hope that's what we're trying to do, working to get to that place. But that place was not Rome in the first century. Rome was so many things, and it still is, but safe and good, I'm not sure. But you can decide. But no doubt the Roman roads were good. They were built to last. And the emperor, Caesar Augustus, was so impressed that he builds a monument to the roads and he puts it smack dab in the center of Rome. Because for him, Rome was the center of the world. And that monument was called the Golden Milestone. And it was said that all distances to all other places were measured from there. So today there's still a marker there, but it's not a golden one. But it's there in the center of Rome to mark the place that the Romans called ground zero, where the journey begins. And the Romans made it easier to journey. As I said, they were incredible civil engineers. Those old roads still being used, and so are the Roman bridges and the Roman aqueducts and the Roman sewers. but it's the road system that's truly extraordinary. Now, the Persian Empire had a great road system, and so did the Inca Empire. A lot of empires had good road systems, and we did too. What did we call the road that went from this end of the country to that end of the country? Route 66. And then we looped it up with our interstate highway systems. But doesn't it seem like our modern system is constantly under repair?
Yes, it is.
Repaving, resurfacing, constant signs, slow down, construction up ahead. Well, that wasn't the case with Roman roads because the Romans built their roads with concrete, and that changed everything. So think about that the next time you open your Torah, um, the Word, or your Bible, the Word of God traveled on those Roman roads. And there were plenty of roads, miles and miles of them, and Rome needed every mile of them. There had to be quick and very efficient ways to get um, soldiers, for example, from one place to another. And soldiers could travel, a whole contingency of soldiers could travel up to 20 miles a day walking those roads. And messengers could move even faster. Those speedy guys could make it 50 to 80 miles in one day because the roads were essential to good government. The Romans were very pragmatic, and the Greeks were too, but the Greeks were also romantic. But funny, don't you think that the Romans would be more romantic, right, than the Greeks? But they really weren't, and we're going to look at that later. But for now, back to Rome with the pragmatic Romans. Now, Alexander the Great was especially pragmatic, and the Romans incorporated his pragmatism, so it became part of them. For example, just like Alexander taught the Greeks, the Romans used what was good in other systems from other places, and they rejected what was not good in their opinion, of course, and Romans were very opinionated. For example, the Romans believed that the pyramids were nothing more than a stupid display of wealth by the pharaohs that served absolutely no purpose as far as the Romans were concerned. Did everybody go to the pyramids? Extraordinary. But it was a little different when it came to the Greeks because the Romans truly appreciated Greek everything, the Greek language, Greek ideas, Greek literature, even Greek clothing. But especially the Romans appreciated Greek engineering and all the Greek innovations when it came to road building. But the Romans added to what they learned from the Greeks, especially when it came to building infrastructure, like aqueducts that got the water into the city and sewers that got the filth out of the city. Now, of course, we're all aware that as I've been talking today and last week, and probably next week too, I'm engaging in what some people would call stereotyping, assigning a role to my narrative. So tell the truth. See if I'm not the only one who does this. When you think Greece, you think the Greeks have been building up like philosophy, right? And theater, all those tragedies and comedies and academies, all those grand centers of learning where you could exchange ideas. But when we think of Romans, we think that the Romans are just building because they're great engineers, practical engineers, not theoretical engineers like the Greeks. The Romans didn't talk about it, they built it. Like the Via Appia. Did you ride on the Via Appia? You can ride on it. It's a perfect little road today, still being used. But more importantly, it's still being studied today by modern engineers. The Roman surveyors are famous, and they built the roads in layers. And you can look it up if you're into it. It's absolutely fascinating. Um, and the Romans, I thought this was interesting. They were the first craftsmen to coin the phrase measure twice,
Cut once.
cut once. So if you're interested in road construction and repair, then Rome is the place for you. So why don't we get on the road to Rome? And just like I warned you last week, get ready to smell it before you see it. In real life, back in the day, as you approach the city, you would smell wood smoke. And then you would get a whiff of waste, human waste. And you know what that smells like, pee and poop. And not just human urine and feces, because there was plenty of animal waste too, and product waste, like food waste. It truly was an olfactory assault. It was awful. And no one wanted to smell it, but especially no one wanted to smell like it, right? So they worked on that, smelling better. It was a whole industry. I want you to listen to this and see if it sounds familiar to you. Whole industry in Rome making money on the way people smell, right? You could buy products that guaranteed to make you smell good, attractive, change your image, right? Does that sound familiar? And some products were more successful than others because some products worked better than others. Some really didn't deliver on what they promised, like the product that promised better armpit smells. This is a true story. Was an early form of deodorant, Roman style, but it wasn't a bestseller because it didn't work, because you had to swallow the deodorant to stop your pits from sweating, and it didn't work. But now, those of you who have visited Rome, I just know you're thinking, but the Romans are really well known for keeping clean, right? They have Roman baths, right? The Romans are famous for their baths, and most of you have visited them. They're extensive and they're lovely. They have public baths and private baths, so they must have been clean Romans, right? No, absolutely not. They were not clean because the Romans bathed in dirty water. One dirty guy climbs out of the tub, and then you climb right in to his dirt. So you came out smelling like that dirty guy. So then you went to the market and you bought oils and perfumes. But this is interesting. Many people back in the day, those ignorant ancients, right? They believed that people actually smelled from the inside out. So the Romans made a plan for that, and they called it purging. Purging. And we still do it today, but what do we call it? Cleansing. I'm going to cleanse my body, right? Well, in the first century in Rome, you didn't cleanse, you purged. You went to the market and you bought golden thistle roots and you boiled them, and then you drank that, and then you purged. And boy, did you purge, because it was a diuretic, right? It made you urinate all that bad odor out of your body, right? And that makes sense, maybe, but I'm not sure. All that urine that was being purged combined with all the other bad odors of this beautiful city, Rome. Now, have you ever heard of a man by the name of Juvenal, spelled with a J? Juvenal. Yeah, very interesting guy. He was a first century Roman writer who wrote into the second century. He's famous. He's a Roman satirist. Now, I don't recommend that you read Juvenal because he is absolutely filthy. His writings, at least some of them, should be rated triple X, and I'm not joking. He's crude and he's really very rude. Now, Juvenal wrote in Latin, but of course, almost everything he wrote was immediately translated into Greek so that it could be read in Rome. And I know that sounds so strange, but we talked about that last week. because Greek was the lingua franca of Rome. But honestly, neither the Greeks or the Romans want to claim Juvenal as one of their own. That's how rude and obnoxious he was. And he has a very strange history biographically. Some of the scholars say that he was probably the son of a freed Spanish slave, but others say, he came from money. Um, but his own family couldn't stand him because he was such a horrible human being. For example, he was a sexist who hated sex, and he was completely homophobic and thoroughly anti Semitic. He hated Jews, but mostly he hated Rome. And one of his most famous works is about Rome. I just read it 2 weeks ago. Oh my goodness, it's chapter 3 in his book of the satires. I think it's 3, pretty sure. And you can find it online in Greek or Latin if you want to remember your high school Latin, and in English. And it's yeah, once I started in Latin and I said, forget this, and went right to English. And it is gross. It's about a man named Ubitrius. Ubitrius. He's the main character, supposedly. But I think the main character is really Rome. Well, Juvenal tells us that Ubitrius is getting ready to move out of Rome. He's going to the country because it's so awful in Rome. And here's just a few things that are wrong with Rome. So please listen carefully to Ubitrius and then think, are you still hearing the same story today about any big city? Ready? Juvenal writes that Ubitrius has to move out of Rome because the city is filled with foreigners, aliens, immigrants. The city has just been overrun by refugees. So it's not even my city, Rome, anymore. Does that sound familiar? And now Demetrius says, because of that riffraff, the only people who can live in the city are immoral people with no hearts or souls. He says, I can't live there anymore because I can't lie anymore. This is a city that prizes corruption and self indulgent behavior, totally immoral. It is no place for a thoughtful, intelligent, honest person like me, right? And just so you know, Beatrice adds, all Romans are also adulterers, and everyone lies about their sex life. It's a danger to your heart and your soul, pure moral corruption. But the worst part, maybe, is that living in Rome is dangerous physically, and it's expensive to live there. Crime out of control, the rents astronomical. See, are you getting the picture? Have you been hearing the same kinds of things, right, about all big cities? And we're still talking about this. It sounds so modern, right? City's filthy, it stinks, it's dangerous. Rich landlords build horrible complexes like the projects, horrible places for horrible people to live in. They just cram poor people into these places. And in this work, I thought it was so interesting. Juvenal uses phrases that we still use today when we describe unscrupulous landlords who are getting approval from unscrupulous government inspectors to allow poor people to live in unsafe buildings. Today we say, oh, those landlords, they didn't really fix those buildings. In fact, that landlord, he just papered over the cracks to make it look better for a little while. But it never really does. Juvenal invented that phrase, papering over the cracks. Now, does that sound like the Rome that you know, that you visited, the eternal city, the sacred city, the Caput Mundi, capital of the world? Do you think Rome has changed over the centuries, right? But does anybody know how Rome got its name. Why is Rome named Rome?
Romulus and Remus.
Aha. Lots of opinions, and that's the number one opinion that I could find. Was named for one of the twins. I forgot how they both got to the wolf, but they were raised by a wolf. Romulus was one of them. Remus was the other one. I don't know if there's a not Reno, that's for sure, but some say that Romulus is the namesake of Rome, but others say it's named for its geographic feature, the river, the Tiber, um, because some say that Rome is from some ancient language, tribal language, and that it actually means oar, OAR. So people rode their way to Rome, obviously, before the roads were built. But for those of you who are interested in mythology, I'm not, but I went to Greco Roman mythology for you. Some say that the origin of the name of Rome is a secret, and only the goddess Angerona knows the reason that Rome is named Rome. But nobody knows Angerona. I couldn't find her anywhere. And but it's interesting. One scholar wrote, "Well, even if Angerona could be found, she would never tell because she took a vow to keep it a secret." So many sayings about Rome, big sayings, really, that meant a lot when the people said them, and they're still being used today as words of advice. For example, when in Rome, you got that one? Um, but that would be very difficult to do until you figured out where you were economically, because all Romans were not equal. There were huge economic gaps between the rich and the poor, severe social stratification. Now, does that sound familiar in big cities, right? The rich lived in luxury. They actually lived in villas, like townhouses, that were built on those famous Roman hills, right? We know the seven Roman hills, but there were a lot more. And that's where the rich built their villas, high above the maddening crowd. And of course, that maddening crowd were the poor people, by far the largest part of Roman demographics. Those people, the poor people, lived in insulae, um, projects. Usually these were very tall buildings, 5 to 7 feet high, and they were built out of wood, and they had one rickety old staircase. No safety precautions were built in the insulae. Does that sound familiar? Um, and some scholars say that there were over 45,000 poorly built apartment buildings for the poor, and many insist that was the real Rome. So, real Rome was gross, not glamorous. It wasn't all white, shiny marble. It was smelly and dangerous and full of lethal threats, which is exactly how that cranky, crabby Juvenal described it over 2,000 years ago. So let's look at what Rome was really like. Let's take a flyover, and we're going to fly in the F formation. We're going to examine the city as it is designed or described by scholars and residents, ancient residents. Um, and we're going to use 5 F words. So let's see if we can think. We did this, right? We did this at introduction on Saturday. 5 F words. Can you think of any F words that would describe an ancient, horrible city?
Free.
Sorry?
Free.
But it wasn't free for the poor.
Like,
I'll give you one. Floods.
oh, that kind of.
Yeah.
Fighting.
Say it again.
Fighting.
There was lots of fighting there, but let me just tell you.
Fire.
Fire. Filth.
Filth.
Biggie. Famines. And finally, fevers. Fevers. So floods, famines, filth, fires and fevers. So let's look at the city, and it really was a city. It wasn't like a large village. It was big, and it really was too big. In fact, back in the day, it was more than twice the size of any other city in the whole world, and it stayed the largest city in the whole world until the year 1850. 1850. Then finally, can you guess what city took over as the biggest city?
New York.
Not New York, 1850. London.
Oh,
London
yeah.
became the biggest city. But can you imagine? Until
18.
yeah, that surprised me. So Rome was known for being big, and it was also known for its hills, particularly the seven hills of Rome. But there were a lot more hills. So if there are hills, that means there are also valleys and plains, and then more hills, and then valleys. And there was a river, the Tiber. Yep, the Tiber, which flooded on a regular basis. And the Tiber could flood. And when I say flood, I mean it. The Tiber was known to rise right out of its banks and reach 50 feet above its normal level. 50 feet.
Talk about a
Um,
cleansing.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
That's a flood, Noah like
Oh, I mean,
flood, right?
You
So
lost
the
population, everything.
oh my goodness, yeah, it was devastating. It just wiped
But it
out.
was a
If you couldn't get out, you stayed
Oh,
dead there. Uh, and of course to get around the city the only way was by boat, which maybe has some meaning when it comes to how Rome was named for an oar. Yet you had to row. um, Now typically that didn't happen on a regular basis. Yes, the Tiber flooded, um, but not 50 feet, but it flooded enough to make the sewers back up, which meant that all the filth of the city also flooded the city, which is another reason the rich people built their houses high on those hills. It wasn't just the nice breeze or the beautiful view, right? It was about staying out of the muck and the mire. So, F number one, floods. And now another damaging F in Rome is even more damaging than flooding. And you guessed what that was.
fire.
Fire, right? Fire. And this was a fairly common danger in most places in the ancient world, particularly where there was a concentration of population. And when you think about it, the only illumination after dark was oil lamps, which is combustible material with a live flame right above it, or candles, also very, very dangerous. And all cooking that was done over an open flame. Um, and the streets, the way the city was built, it was built in a grid pattern, very narrow streets, impossible to get water carts from one end of the street to the other. Um, so it was really, really easy to start a fire. And it was really, really difficult to stop the fire from spreading. And once it spread, it was impossible.
Were
to-
there a lot of wooden buildings? See,
All
you
wood.
think of stone when you
That's
think
what
of,
I'm thinking of.
yeah.
Cement.
Yeah, stone, and that's what the villas were made of, but not the poor people's homes. They were made of wood.
Think of Nero burning
Yeah.
Rome down.
Yeah.
Exactly. But of course, that's not true. That's not true. That's not. Yeah, he just got blamed for it. And who did he blame? Christians. He blamed the Christians. Yeah, we're gonna talk about him, but it gave him a good reason to execute by crucifixion a lot of those little fire starters, Christian fire starters. But speaking of a giant fire, 64, the fire of 64 CE, the Great Fire of Rome. That fire burned for 9 days in the city. I mean, just unstoppable. And it completely destroyed 10 of the 14 districts of Rome. And there are eyewitness accounts. It's tragic to read them. But after that fire, which burned itself out, the Emperor Augustus decides to create a fire department. Yeah, you know. And so he gets 7,000 men lined up as firefighters. But of course, they're still dealing with wooden structures, those narrow streets. It was an impossible job. So there we have flooding and fire, rather dangerous. Now, another impossible job in Rome was feeding that ever growing population of Rome, which brings us to our third F word, famine. How are we going to feed these people? So the Romans, regular people, poor people, and even the rich people from time to time lived with the reality of food insecurity. But what did the Romans eat? Um, but we know that old expression, to keep the people happy. What did the Roman government give them? Bread and circuses. Give them bread and circuses, which is actually a political strategy to keep people happy. Give them something else to talk about. Replace the narrative with something that'll take the focus off of us politicians or us. Um, is any of this sounding familiar to you? You know, we're not growing. Um, Most people in Rome in this time, their diet was 75% grain, grain, from which they made bread. But if you had money, olives were added to your diet in the form of olive oil, and was good for you. And of course, wine. Wine was a major part of everyone's diet. Poor people, it was mostly watered down wine, but plenty of wine. And this is the diet that you can read about, that Juvenal was ranting about in that satire I told you about. Um, Juvenal was particularly against that whole strategy, that mentality of bread and circus presented by the Roman government. He thought it was just abusive to the population of bread and circuses. And when I say bread, I really mean grain because it wasn't bread yet. The government had a system that allotted grain so that people could make their bread. And it was a good system, I think, typically well thought out because it's Roman. And the authorities start by taking care of the children. The children got the first allotment of grain. And just so you know, the boys got a much bigger portion of grain than the girls. It's just a fact of life. But listen to this. Men got portions of grain, but women didn't. No grain. Apparently, scholars say that the men probably got enough grain to share it with their women. But why in the world didn't women get a share of the grain? Does anybody have any ideas about why the government?
Control.
Well, they weren't citizens, were they?
They weren't citizens, so that means no vote.
Correct.
Women
Don't need
couldn't
You don't
vote.
need it.
So there was absolutely
Wow.
no reason for the government, the local governments particularly, to keep women happy and well fed and smiling. You know, um,
Were women dying?
you
Yeah.
betcha, you bet they were. But I think it's so meaningful that that when we think about the preachers, right, and the teachers and the prophets that followed, like Jesus, for example, and all his followers, we can understand why they were so popular with women. You know, women joined that movement.
But they were women.
Sorry?
They were women. That was the point. His evangelists were women.
There were plenty of men
Yeah,
first.
the
But women joined, but they were, but my point is that the women were not welcome in Roman religious activities. But when Jesus came,
Yes.
they were not only welcomed, they were barraged with women. And we'll talk about that next week too, how the Greek system and the Roman system impacted what Jesus was doing in the world. But as you said, Cindy, it was absolutely not unusual to walk down a narrow street in the poor part of Rome, and even in the better part of Rome, and you would find women literally lying in the street, dying of starvation. Now, I don't know if anybody, I have never, my husband traveled to India on business. He saw that.
Yeah.
He, I don't know if you,
We saw people living on the sidewalk. That's where they lived, and they were dressed in cloth and just living there with
well, you
a
can see that in
rag.
San Diego too, believe it or not.
Oh,
Living on the street.
well,
Um,
yeah, the homeless. Well, these, yeah,
but I'm talking
but
almost corpses
yes,
lying
oh,
on the
skinny.
street.
Yeah.
And
That
he,
was
and
in Calcutta or whatever
yes,
they call
yes,
it now.
that's where yeah, I always thought it would be wonderful to do a lesson on Mother Teresa. You know, sweet Mother Teresa, she was hard as nails. You know, she had to be to do what she did. You know, advocates today learned a lot from her. But even in the good years when there was enough food, when it was still getting harder and harder for the government authorities to make enough and produce enough food because the areas around Rome, they were just too small. There was just not enough land devoted to agriculture. So the Roman authorities had to turn to importing food. So they went to Spain and they went to North Africa and bought food. Which had to be stored so that it could be distributed. And people knew where these facilities were located. So when the people were practically dying of starvation, they knew where to go and demand more grain. So there were very often food riots throughout the city, mostly by the poor. And people died of hunger, mostly poor people. But honestly, when it came to the fourth F, um, no one was spared from the fourth F. Um, and the fourth F is filth. Filth. And there was plenty of it for everyone. Should you be strolling down a Roman street, there were two things that you would be certain to encounter in the poor part of the city and even in the better parts of the city. The two things, two physical properties that you would encounter would be corpses and sewage. So let's start with the sewage and get that out of the way. If only we could, right? On any given day, back in the day, scholars say, I did not make this up, scholars say that you could count on, at the minimum, 350,000 gallons of urine.
Oh,
One day. And at least 100,000 pounds of feces.
What's the population?
yeah. I was wondering.
Kept growing and growing, and there's so much controversy about that. Um, but yeah, let me get to that. Let me think about that for a minute because I don't want to miss. It was too much crap for the population, that's for certain. But listen to this. Um, there were no less in one day than 150 bodies just lying in the street, dying and decaying and rotting right into the urine and the feces. So imagine Every day, that's what ended up right in front of you. Did we lose her?
No,
Oh, good.
no.
So no wonder Juvenal was writing, get out of the city, move out. It's a cesspool. And it was a cesspool. But wait, it gets worse. Now add, as I said, to all the live people's waste and to all the dead people's rotting body, add the animals to that mix. And it really is beyond our comprehension. And keep in mind that this was before that whole notion of the germ theory of disease was really known. But these are Romans and Greeks, don't you think that someone would have known something?
Didn't they have the sewage system?
They had a interesting, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment as we picture it. Someone must have known something about how this mess should have been handled. And big cities, they're all alike, right? No, not ancient big cities. For example, Alexandria, not as big as Rome, but it was a big city in Egypt. They didn't face the same problems and the same magnitude as these health risks because the Greeks stayed on top of their filth. But the Romans just used stopgap measures. The rich Romans, this cracked me up, made extensive use of litters to deal with the litter in the streets. They simply rose above it by climbing into sedan chairs. Do you know what a sedan chair is? So let's just take half this table. It was probably, unless it was a family model, like a station wagon, then it would probably be this size. And there were seats built in to the platform and cushions and little blankets. And then there was a canopy and there were curtains all around the seats. And then there were 4 poles at each of the corners. And you would climb in as a rich person before you left your hill. And your slaves would carry you right over the filth and the dead bodies every day, right? But everyone contributed to the filth, and we know that the Romans were good builders, but they made good sewers, but they weren't miracle makers. And we know that the major purpose of Rome's sewage system was not to carry the crap out. Rather, it was to provide drainage for the city, carry water away from city structures and into the ditches like we have, right, that were leading out of the city. But that didn't always happen. And anyway, most of the structures at that time weren't even hooked up to the sewage system. And most people just dumped their bodily waste into the streets from clay pots. That was their portable toilet, a clay pot. And usually the whole family used the same pot for numbers 1 and 2. And then someone was in charge of that pot. And when the pot got full, someone had to carry it down that rickety staircase to the dumping area. But that didn't always happen that way. First of all, some people couldn't even afford a clay pot. And we've heard of those people. What do we say about those people? They didn't have a pot to pee in. Comes from Rome. Rome. So these people just peed in the street. And some people didn't schlep that heavy pot down the stairs. They just tossed those noxious contents out the window and into the street. That's why you saw people in Rome carrying umbrellas on a sunny day. Heads up, right?
Habit of men walking on the outside.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that was the British. They were so gallant, chivalrous. But in Rome, everybody got wet. But to make a long, disgusting story short, the streets really were swimming in raw sewage. It was a hot mess, even in winter. The streets were a breeding ground for all kinds of diseases and parasitic infections that made everyone sick. And that's our fifth word: fevers, diseases. They ran rampant. Diseases like malaria and dysentery and cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis, leptospirosis, and leprosy, and the list of parasites. I couldn't go any further. I'll just sum it up: worms and all kinds of varieties, and all of them bad. So, needless to say, there were deaths. And as always, the very young and the very old died first, and they died most often.
I wonder the life expectancy.
20s
That
for the
was it?
poor. And
Older
30 was a
than
kind of old age. But it's interesting. Women had less life expectancy because of childbirth. It was kind of 50-50 for them. But I think it's a miracle. Yeah, exactly. To get more little voters, But it's interesting. We're going to talk about that. She said, "Why feed the women if they're just going to die?" Well, for more voters, right? Because they were the only. Otherwise, they would have been eliminated, no doubt about it. But I don't know if you've ever read any of the men who were in the Roman army and they sent their letters home. Fascinating. Dear wife, I know you're about to give birth. Just remember you promised me if it's a girl, take it to the dump and leave her there. Now, does that sound familiar to you? A huge country in Asia proposed that as a political strategy at one time. And they're trying to make up for that now. But
Yeah.
um,
They didn't think ahead.
no, they didn't. However, people who needed a helper would go to the dump and pick up a baby. And when I say a baby, a 2-year-old left. It's, as bad as we think things are, we live in paradise. But can you just imagine how difficult it had to have been, right? How hard it must have been to find hope that anything was ever going to get better. But it did get better, and we're going to look at probably 3 reasons how and why it got better. And it was because of institutions, religious institutions that had more influence on the people than the state institutions had. And clearly, I'm talking about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam 600 years later. So, next week, we're going to look at how God, thank you, God, cleaned up our streets and our homes and our schools and our bodies and our souls. So, now go home and wash your hands and thank God that the dirt goes out. So I wish you a clean and healthy week. Shavua Tov, which means have a great week in Hebrew. And God bless. And if you have any questions or anything you want to add, God bless you. Be sure to contact me and let me know. Next week, we're going to look at what did the Jews do with all this? But we're going to go back and look at a few things Alexander left to help us with.
Have you ever been to Paris? I've been there numerous times. You walk those streets, you want to look at the architecture. You have to watch the sidewalks.
Because they don't pick up after their
They
animal.
don't pick up after, and if you see a man standing facing a building real close, watch out for the trickle coming down the sidewalk. It's, as much as it's so much beauty there and fascinating things, it's still, there's
But
still.
they are so sophisticated.
Yeah.
They are très chic. We are. I know some people feel that Americans are rude and brutes over. It's not true. Americans are very well behaved, and we usually behave ourselves when we're in mixed company. So go American. And